Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this, I don't know, this comforting expectation of precision.
Oh,
So
absolutely. It's like engineering.
exactly. I mean, you fall, you break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray just shows that stark, jagged white line right across the bone. The doctor points at the screen and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Right. It is completely binary. It's undeniably clear.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it offers this immediate linear path to a solution. We naturally crave that kind of visibility, I think. We want to be able to just categorize our problems so we can apply a standard fix.
Yeah, totally. But then, you step out of the realm of physical biology and you step into the world of human organizations. You step into group psychology, shared missions, team dynamics, and suddenly, boom, that metaphorical x-ray machine is just completely useless. We find ourselves looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
It really is. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. And the real danger there is that you can have an organization, whether that is, a corporate team, a nonprofit, or a community group, that looks perfectly healthy on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
They have all the right language.
Mm-hmm.
The quarterly goals are set. The mission statement is beautifully designed and plastered right there on the lobby wall. People are smiling in the meetings.
Right, the surface level looks great.
Exactly. But underneath that surface layer of compliance, the structural bone is actually fractured. The internal system is actively failing. And because there is no jagged white line on a screen anywhere, nobody knows how to point to the break.
Which is exactly why we are going there today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you here. Whether you are prepping for a massive leadership retreat or trying to figure out why your incredibly talented startup team is just burning out.
Or if you're just one of those people who absolutely loves untangling complex organizational psychology.
Yes. We know you are out there, and you are in the right place. We know you are insatiably curious, and we know you love those aha moments just as much as we do. And our mission today is to deliver exactly that.
And I have to say, the source material we are examining today is an absolute goldmine for those moments of profound clarity.
It really is. Today, we are pulling from an excerpt of a deeply insightful book. It's called Is Your Church Ready for Real Mission? Now, right off the bat, let's address the context here, because a book about church leadership might seem incredibly niche to some of you.
Right. You might be wondering how this applies to your boardroom or your tech startup or your community organizing.
Exactly. But stick with us, because while the text is focused on the architecture of a religious congregation, the organizational and, spiritual psychology within these pages operates as a masterclass in why any well-intentioned mission fails, and conversely, how to actually build the infrastructure required to sustain it.
Yeah, if you just look past the specific terminology for a moment, what this text is actually diagnosing is the universal human condition when it comes to collective action.
Right.
It explores the deeply embedded sociological and, psychological reasons why our best intentions just collapse under their own weight. It reveals how culture forms invisibly around us, and it explains the profound reasons why we instinctively resist the very changes we claim to desperately want.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the fundamental mission of this deep dive is to deconstruct a massive, pervasive misconception. It's this idea that vision and passion are the primary engines of change.
Oh, that is such a huge myth.
It really is. It's this romantic notion that if you just care enough, if you just rally the troops and yell loud enough about the overarching goal, you will inevitably reach the finish line.
Right, like enthusiasm is all you need.
Exactly. So we are going to explore how internal fog destroys external momentum, why culture dictates behavior far more than strategy does, and how to actually bridge the gap between wanting to do something and having the capacity to do it.
And to do that, I think we have to start by dismantling the most common excuse for organizational failure. It is an excuse we hear across, literally every sector of society. It's the idea that a project failed simply because people just didn't care enough.
Oh man, the lack of passion defense. How many times have you heard that, listener? A new initiative collapses, a volunteer program fizzles out, a startup pivots into oblivion, and the inevitable postmortem from leadership is, passion just wasn't there. People lost their fire. They just didn't want it badly enough.
Yeah, it is the easiest scapegoat available. In psychology, there is a concept called the fundamental attribution error.
Oh, I love this concept. Explain that for us.
So it's our tendency to explain someone's behavior based on their internal character or disposition, rather than considering the external situational factors. So when a mission fails, leaders frequently commit this error. They attribute the failure to a moral or emotional deficit in their team, like a lack of dedication.
Wow. Yeah, that happens all the time.
But the source text argues something far more profound and, frankly, much more uncomfortable for leaders to hear. It states that unhealthy systems simply cannot sustain a healthy mission, period.
Okay, let's ground this in a metaphor because the text is making a vital distinction here between desire and capacity. Imagine you are building a high-performance sports car, right? You spend all your time, all your capital, and all your focus dropping in this massive, roaring 12-cylinder engine.
Right.
That engine represents your passion. It represents the vision. It sounds absolutely incredible when you rev it in the driveway. It turns heads. It creates excitement.
Everyone's looking at it.
Exactly. But in your obsession with the engine, you completely forgot to install a transmission. You forgot the axles. You forgot the infrastructure that actually translates power into forward motion.
The result there is pretty inevitable, right? You can put the pedal to the metal, the engine will scream, you will burn through fuel at an astonishing rate, and you'll generate a tremendous amount of heat and noise.
Lots of noise.
But you aren't moving forward. You are literally just sitting in the driveway, violently vibrating, until the engine ultimately burns itself out.
And when that engine inevitably blows, it would be absolutely absurd to blame it for lacking power.
Right.
I mean, the engine did exactly what it was supposed to do. The failure wasn't a lack of power. It was a lack of a mechanism to channel that power. Yet, in our organizations, when our passionate teams burn out, we blame the engine.
We always blame the engine. What's fascinating here is how the text frames this dynamic. It insists that diagnosing a lack of readiness is a diagnosis, not a condemnation.
That's a great distinction.
Diagnoses matter immensely because they tell the objective truth about what is happening beneath the surface, stripping away the moral judgment. The text points out that leaders often blame the external culture when their internal engines burn out.
Right, they say things like, people's attention spans are too short these days, or the economic climate is too harsh.
Or volunteers are just impossible to find post-pandemic.
Exactly, and those external realities might be perfectly valid. I mean, the economic climate might actually be terrible.
They often are valid,
Hmm.
but, pointing to the weather doesn't fix the car. The text forces leaders to look in the mirror and ask a much harder, entirely internal question. Are we actually ready for the mission we say we want?
It's a tough question.
It is, because a church, a business, or a nonprofit can have completely sincere leaders, incredibly faithful members, and fiercely ambitious plans. The passion can be off the charts. But if the internal system is confused, if there is no transmission, the mission will stall.
Are we actually ready? That distinction between willingness and readiness is so critical because when an organization isn't ready, when its systems are unhealthy, it starts to exact a toll on the people within it.
It really does.
The text introduces this brilliant concept of the invisible tax. Can we dive into the mechanics of that? Like, how does an unhealthy system actively drain a passionate team?
It drains them through cognitive load and constant friction. Think about an organization where communication is inconsistent, where roles are poorly defined, or where the decision-making process is just a complete mystery.
I've worked in a few of those.
Most of us have. Because the structure isn't clear, people constantly have to guess. They have to ask the same questions repeatedly. Who needs to approve this? Where is the file? Are we still doing that event next week?
Oh my gosh, yes. And then leaders spend all of their time clarifying what should have been obvious. They spend their days putting out administrative fires instead of actually strategizing and getting stressed just thinking about it. It's like death by 1,000 Slack messages.
Exactly. And that friction is the invisible tax. The energy that should be going toward the external mission. The energy that should be reaching the community, building the product, or serving the marginalized is instead entirely consumed by internal dysfunction. It drains attention, it drains trust, it drains courage, and it drains initiative. It makes every single basic task feel like moving a boulder up a hill. And the tragic result is that there is literally zero surplus energy left for the actual mission.
So listener, I want you to think about a time you joined a deeply passionate team. Maybe it was a political campaign, a new startup, or, I don't know, a community garden project. You had a great vision, but the follow-through was an absolute disaster. Nobody knew who was actually in charge of ordering supplies, emails went unanswered, and meetings were just these endless circles of shared confusion. How quickly did your initial excitement turn into deep, cynical exhaustion?
Probably pretty fast.
Yeah, and the text is validating you right now. That wasn't a lack of passion on your part. That was the invisible tax of an unready system bankrupting your emotional and intellectual energy.
So if passion isn't enough, and if the invisible tax destroys momentum, we really have to look at how capacity, the transmission of your car metaphor, is actually built. How do we become ready? The text looks closely at the biblical narrative and identifies a very clear recurring pattern that answers this. Formation must precede commission.
Formation precedes commission, meaning the structure and the character of a group have to be built before they are ever sent out to execute the mission.
Precisely. The author uses the historical narrative of the Israelites in the Old Testament to illustrate this. They were liberated from brutal slavery in Egypt, but they weren't immediately dropped into the Promised Land to establish a new nation.
Right, that would have been catastrophic.
It really would have been. Instead, they were led into the wilderness. And the text makes a crucial point here. The wilderness wasn't a punishment, and it wasn't just a waiting room. It was a rigorous classroom.
Yeah, because if you take a group of people who have only ever known the systems of slavery, where their time, their labor, and their decisions were entirely dictated by someone else, and you suddenly give them absolute freedom and a complex mission, they will collapse. They don't have the internal architecture for self-governance.
That is exactly the sociological reality.
Right.
In the wilderness, they had to be fundamentally reformed. They had to learn how to rely on daily manna, which taught them trust rather than hoarding. They had to learn the concept of a Sabbath rest.
Which is huge.
Right, because it taught them that their value wasn't tied solely to their production, a radical shift from a slave mindset. They had to learn boundaries, conflict resolution, and communal order. They had to learn how to be a unified people, not just a mob of refugees, before they could handle the responsibility of the Promised Land.
You know, we see this mirrored in the tech world all the time. Think about a scrappy startup that suddenly receives $100 million in Series B funding.
Oh, yeah.
They are suddenly thrust into their promised land of massive resources and market expectations. But because they haven't spent time in the formative wilderness, because they don't have HR structures, reliable management layers, or a solidified culture, the very success they begged for ends up destroying the company.
It happens so often.
The founders burn out, the culture turns toxic, and they just implode.
That is a perfect parallel. The text also points to Jesus in the New Testament to solidify this pattern. He didn't just stand on a hill, announce a grand vision of saving the world, and say, okay, everyone, run in different directions and do good things. Just be passionate.
Right, just go figure it out.
Exactly. He didn't do that. He spent years building a core, tight-knit community. He taught his disciples how to forgive each other, how to handle inevitable conflicts, how to share resources, and how to endure intense misunderstanding from the public.
He formed them first.
Yes, he formed their internal architecture, their relational capacity, long before he commissioned them to go outward into the world.
But wait, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener, because when we start heavily emphasizing words like structure, internal architecture, and order, especially in the context of something inherently emotional and spiritual like a church or even a really mission-driven nonprofit, it starts to sound a bit bureaucratic.
I can see that.
Right. Doesn't heavily focusing on systems risk replacing the organic, spontaneous magic of a community with sterile middle management? If I have to fill out 3 forms in triplicate just to help someone in my community, I'm going to stop helping. Doesn't structure kill the spirit?
That is the most common fear when we discuss organizational systems. Absolutely. And the text anticipates it perfectly. The counter-argument it provides is one of the most profound insights in the entire book.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that it states, very simply, order protects love.
Wow. Order protects love. That completely flips the script.
It does. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it dismantles the false modern dichotomy we've created between structure and spirit, or between bureaucracy and passion. We tend to view order and love as inherently opposite forces. But the text argues that love without order is ultimately sentimental, fleeting, and highly unstable. It might feel incredibly sincere in the moment. You might feel a burst of deep affection for your community. But if there's no structure to sustain it, the people who depend on that love are at massive risk.
Okay, let's break that down. Because if a severe crisis hits a community, say a natural disaster, or even just a family within the community going through a sudden tragedy, and the group relies solely on sentimental love, what happens?
Well, people will undoubtedly post very supportive things on social media.
Right. They will offer a quick, heartfelt hug in the lobby. They will feel genuine empathy. But because there is no order, the meals don't actually get organized.
Exactly.
The financial support gets mismanaged, the highly vulnerable people fall right through the cracks, and the actual tangible needs remain unmet.
Because sentimental love cannot mobilize resources effectively. It just can't. Conversely, the text acknowledges that order without love becomes cold, rigid, and controlling. That's the bureaucracy you were warning against.
Right, the duplicate forms.
Exactly. But when order is intentionally submitted to a higher purpose, when systems are designed specifically to facilitate care, order becomes a powerful vessel for faithful, enduring love. Without order, your most gifted and empathetic people burn out because they carry the weight of everyone's needs.
That is so true.
Without order, interpersonal conflicts metastasize and destroy teams because there is no clear, safe process for reconciliation. Without order, the vulnerable are neglected.
It's basically the skeleton that allows the body of the mission to actually stand up and move.
That's a great way to put it. The text references the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where he famously instructs that all things in their gatherings should be done decently and in order.
Yeah, people usually read that as Paul being a rigid, unfun bureaucrat.
They do. But he was writing to a community dealing with immense chaos. The lack of order was actively harming people. It was marginalizing the less vocal members. Paul was insisting that structure isn't the rival of the Spirit. It is an instrument of the Spirit. It creates a safe container for the community to actually function.
There is a metaphor mentioned in the text about two foundations, building a house on rock versus building a house on sand. We've all heard it. But the text adds a fascinating interpretative layer. It says that the storm that hits the house doesn't just destroy, it reveals.
Yes, the storm of complexity.
Oh, I like that.
When an organization starts growing, or when it truly begins to engage with the messy reality of its outward mission, the operational complexity increases exponentially. That complexity acts as a storm battering the house. And that storm reveals whether what looked like deep spiritual maturity or what looked like a bulletproof company culture in the early days was actually grounded in durable habits, clear communication, and solid systems.
Because if you don't have the internal structure, the rock foundation, the weight of your own success will just crush you. The storm of scale reveals the sand of your internal systems.
Which logically moves us to the most practical and perhaps the most confronting part of the entire analysis. If we agree that order protects love and that formation must precede commission, how do we practically build this order? How do we lay the rock foundation?
Right, how do we actually do it?
Well, the author forces us to look critically at the architecture of our decision-making by asking 4 highly uncomfortable questions.
These 4 questions are brilliant. They are so simple, but they cut right through the organizational fog. To eradicate that fog, an organization must definitively answer who decides, who owns, who evaluates, and who follows through.
We probably need to define fog here because it is the natural state of most human organizations. Fog is ambiguity.
Yeah.
In an organizational fog, people guess at their responsibilities. Leaders are forced to improvise constantly because there are no set protocols. Energy is wasted on redundant efforts. And most importantly, in the fog, interpersonal trust erodes because expectations are continually mismatched.
I want to introduce a psychological concept here that I think perfectly mirrors what the text is talking about with fog. In social psychology, there is a well-documented phenomenon called the bystander effect.
Right.
If someone collapses on a crowded city street and you just yell out into the crowd, "Somebody call 911," there is a distressingly high chance that nobody will actually do it. Everyone assumes that someone else in the crowd is handling it. The responsibility is diffused. But if you point directly to a specific person in a red shirt and say, "You, call 911, the spell is broken, and they do it.
Because responsibility has been localized and clarified. The fog has been lifted.
Yes. And in ministry, in nonprofits, or in corporate settings, we suffer from an insidious organizational bystander effect. We use this incredibly inclusive, warm language. We are all in this together. This is our shared mission. We all own this project.
It sounds so good on paper.
It sounds lovely. It feels great to say. But functionally, it flattens responsibility into mere sentiment. If everyone owns it, nobody actually owns it. When a critical task slips through the cracks, everyone looks around assuming someone else was handling it.
This raises an important question about the distinction between helping and owning. The text makes a crucial, penetrating point here. A volunteer can assist with an event without owning its ultimate outcome. A committee can enthusiastically support a vision without owning its execution. But real mission requires owners, not just helpers. Ownership means bearing the ultimate responsibility for the outcome. It means standing before God or before the board of directors or before the community and answering for the results. It is a willingness to confidently say, the buck stops here with me.
And the text doesn't just theorize about this, it gives a fascinating historical example from the book of Acts in the Bible to prove it. Specifically, chapter 6. Let's translate this into modern organizational terms, because it's basically a classic scaling problem.
Right. The early church in Acts was experiencing explosive startup-level growth. Thousands of people were joining, and with rapid scale comes rapid complexity. A sudden crisis emerged. The Greek-speaking widows within the community were being neglected in the daily distribution of food.
Which is a huge deal.
It was an administrative failure, causing real human suffering. Now, the apostles, the founders of this movement, could have reacted the way many leaders do. They could have just preached a louder, more passionate sermon about the importance of love and unity. They could have told everyone to care more. They could have spiritualized the disorder.
Just pray harder about the logistics, guys. We just need more passion for the widows.
Exactly. They could have blamed the congregation for a lack of zeal, but they didn't. They recognized it as a systemic failure, and they addressed it structurally.
Right.
They essentially said, it is not right for us, the founders, to neglect our primary role of teaching and leading to micromanage the daily food distribution. So choose 7 qualified, trustworthy individuals, and we will completely turn this operational responsibility over to them.
The founders delegated the code base, they recognized they were the bottleneck, and appointed specific owners.
They did. They appointed specific owners to handle the logistics. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this proves that practical, grounded administration is not the enemy of spiritual priorities. It actively serves and protects them. The apostles eradicated the organizational fog by clarifying exactly who owns the follow-through.
They moved from, we all care about the widows, to these 7 specific individuals own the outcome of feeding the widows.
Exactly.
So we have who decides and who owns. Let's talk about the third question, who evaluates? Because I think in passionate, mission-driven organizations, evaluation is treated as a dirty word.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels sterile, it feels corporate, it feels intensely judgmental, especially if volunteers are involved.
The text notes that evaluation often feels highly threatening because people conflate performance with identity.
Ah, that's it.
They fear that asking, did this initiative actually work, is the exact same thing as asking, were you a faithful, good person? So, to avoid hurting feelings, organizations just avoid evaluation entirely. But the author frames evaluation in a beautiful, disruptive way. Evaluation is not criticism. Evaluation is faithfulness.
Okay, break that down for me. How is looking at data or outcomes an act of faithfulness?
The author uses a pastoral metaphor. Think about a shepherd. A shepherd who never examines the flock to see if they are healthy or if they are wandering into danger is not a loving shepherd.
Right.
They are a negligent one. In the same way, a leader who launches initiatives but never stops to learn from a failed one is not displaying humility, they are displaying arrogance. They are assuming their initial idea was flawless.
A shepherd who never examines the flock isn't loving. That completely dismantles the excuse we use. We avoid evaluating programs because we want to be nice.
Right, we don't want to hurt feelings.
We don't want to tell the volunteer team that their event was a flop. But avoiding the truth isn't nice. It's negligent to the overall mission.
It is deeply negligent, because if you never evaluate, you will inevitably keep reliving the exact same mistakes year after year, just under slightly different names in marketing.
We've all seen that happen.
You will continually confuse motion with actual progress. True evaluation asks hard questions. Did this effort actually serve the people we are trying to reach? Did it materially align with our core values, or was it just busy work?
Right.
Without those answers, you are flying entirely blind. You are burning the car engine and calling the smoke of victory.
And then the final question of the 4, who follows through? The text says follow through is the crucible where trust is built. It's where your organizational culture communicates to the outside world. Our promises actually matter.
Because churches, nonprofits, and tech startups are notoriously wonderfully good at beginnings.
We are the absolute champions of the kickoff meeting, the launch party, the vision casting retreat, the new brand reveal.
We absolutely love the adrenaline rush of starting something new. It requires no stamina.
None at all.
But the ordinary, unglamorous weight of continuation is where the mission actually lives or dies. If there is a pattern of poor follow-through, if new visitors aren't contacted, if promised features aren't shipped, if community needs are noted but never addressed, people very quickly learn that the organization is a place of loud intentions, not quiet execution.
Wow.
And the moment they realize that, they stop trusting the vision. They stop investing their own energy.
So, listener, apply this to your context right now. Look at your own projects. Look at your department, your startup team, your volunteer group, or even your family dynamics.
Yeah, it applies everywhere.
Is there a critical task floating in the fog right now where someone should probably handle that eventually, is functioning as your only system? Because if it is, the text says that task is already dying. You have to answer the 4 questions to give it life.
Which brings us to a critical transition in the source material. Structure alone, answering those 4 questions, clarifying roles, establishing pipelines, that is just the skeleton of an organization.
Right.
A skeleton is necessary, but a skeleton cannot move on its own. It needs a soul, a central nervous system. And in an organization, that soul is culture.
And we need to be very clear here. Culture isn't what your mission statement says on the website.
No.
It's not the core values painted on the break room wall.
Not at all. Culture is the invisible curriculum. Culture is what a community repeatedly rewards, what it quietly tolerates, and what it fundamentally assumes to be true about the world. The text draws a sharp, penetrating contrast between 2 fundamental types of organizational culture, an inward culture and an outward culture.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me because the distinction is subtle, but the implications are massive. Let's paint a picture of these 2 cultures. I think of an inward culture like a private country club and an outward culture like a hospital emergency room.
That is an excellent framework.
Yeah.
An inward culture, like your country club, fundamentally organizes its decisions around the question, what do we prefer? It is meticulously designed for the preservation of comfort, status, and predictability for the people who are already inside, who have already paid their dues.
It's exclusive.
Exactly. An outward culture, like the emergency room, fundamentally asks, who still needs to hear, see, and experience what we have to offer? It is oriented entirely toward moving toward the unreached, the outsider, the marginalized, or in a business context, the unserved customer.
Right. It expects disruption.
Because the people coming through the doors are in need.
And the text points out how Jesus constantly intentionally broke inward habits. He was the ultimate disruptor of inward country club culture. The religious leaders of his day had built this massive, complex, self-protecting inward culture.
They really had.
It was entirely about preserving their boundaries, maintaining their purity laws, and deciding who was in and who was out. And Jesus just crashes right through all of it.
Yeah.
He intentionally eats with tax collectors who were despised. He physically touches people who were considered ceremonially unclean and contagious. He allowed himself to be constantly interrupted by outsiders.
He didn't build a ministry around preserving religious comfort for the elite. He modeled a radically outward life. Proximity to the brokenness of the world mattered to him far more than institutional preservation.
That's powerful.
And what the text explores next is the deep psychology of why our organizations, even the ones founded on radical outward visions, inevitably drift back toward an inward posture. Gravity always pulls inward.
Right, because no founder or pastor sits down at a desk on day 1 and says, let's build a selfish, exclusionary, bureaucratic culture that ignores outsiders.
Never.
It just happens slowly over time. Why?
Well, it is crucial to note that inwardness isn't always born from malicious selfishness or arrogance. The text offers a profound psychological insight here that should induce empathy in all leaders. Inwardness is often born from profound fatigue or what it calls wound memory.
Wound memory. That phrase really gave me pause when I read it. It implies an organizational trauma response.
That is exactly what it is. Think about a community, a church, or a business that went through a period of rapid, chaotic growth. Maybe they doubled in size in a year, and it completely broke their internal systems.
Yeah, the growing pains.
Exactly. The staff worked 80-hour weeks, volunteers burned out, and things fell apart. Or maybe they had a catastrophic leadership failure, a betrayal of trust by a founder.
Wow.
The collective body of the organization remembers that trauma. So instinctively, without even realizing it, the organization will begin to organize itself around self-preservation.
They build walls.
They build bureaucratic walls to slow things down. They become highly suspicious of outsiders or new hires because outsiders represent disruption and potential pain. They want to protect whatever fragile piece they have left.
It makes complete sense. If growth caused pain, you subconsciously stop trying to grow. But the tricky part is, an organization rarely admits this. They still use the outward language.
Precisely. The rhetoric masks the reality. An inward church or a traumatized corporate team might still use incredibly ambitious outward rhetoric. They might preach passionate sermons about reaching the lost or disrupting the global market, but their actual daily habits teach their members to prioritize safety and comfort.
You can have a giant banner that says, "Everyone is welcome." But if a visitor walks in and every habit of the community screams, "This is for us," the banner is a lie.
Right.
If the chairs are arranged in closed circles, if everyone only talks to their established friend group after the meeting, if the stage announcements are filled with inside jokes and acronyms that aren't explained, the visitor feels that culture instantly.
Instantly.
The theology, the mission statement, the banner, it is all totally irrelevant at that point.
Because culture is felt long before it is analyzed. If the emotional center of gravity in a room is self-preservation, then any new person is subconsciously treated as an interruption to the social rhythm, rather than the very purpose of the gathering.
So, if the model of an outward culture is so clearly better, and if Jesus modeled it so perfectly, and if businesses know they need to reach new markets, why is it so incredibly hard to maintain? Why does every human group fight the changes required to stay outward?
Because change exposes our deepest loyalties.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask what we actually value most. And that brings us to a vital section of the text, the anatomy of resistance.
Oh, this is so good.
The text identifies 5 distinct, overlapping layers of resistance to change. And understanding these layers is vital for any leader, because leaders often treat all resistance as if it is just stubbornness, laziness, or direct rebellion.
Right, they're just being difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But human resistance is much more complex than that.
Let's go through these 5 layers deeply, because this is where the psychology gets real. Layer number 1 is fear.
Fear is the most primal reaction to change. It is fundamentally about loss aversion. It is the fear of losing control, the fear of losing social influence, or simply the fear of losing the comfort of familiar, predictable patterns. If a church or an organization changes its approach to reach a new demographic, the people currently inside fear that the influx of new voices will erase their old ones. If we change the music or change the product line, will this place still feel like mine? It is a deeply human fear of being displaced.
It's the fear of becoming obsolete in a place you helped build. Okay, layer number 2 is fatigue. And this ties directly back to what we said earlier about the invisible tax.
Yes, it does. This is perhaps the most misdiagnosed form of resistance. Fatigue comes from overextended volunteers or chronically stressed employees who have learned through painful repeated experience that the word change is just a corporate buzzword for an uncompensated new burden.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
When an energetic leader stands up and announces a bold new initiative, a fatigued person doesn't feel excitement. Their nervous system registers a threat. They just feel the crushing weight of more work they already know they cannot handle.
That is a massive distinction for a leader to grasp. They aren't resisting the mission, they are resisting being crushed. They agree with the goal, they just don't have the physiological or emotional bandwidth to take on another project. Okay, layer number 3, control.
Control is the quiet, insidious enemy of shared mission. It often disguises itself as a passionate demand for excellence or quality control.
Ah, perfectionism.
Right. People want to protect their private little kingdoms within the organization because, true, shared ownership feels highly threatening to their ego. If the mission actually scales, if the church doubles in size, or the startup goes global, they might not be the most important, indispensable person in the room anymore.
I see this constantly. It's the middle manager who says, "I'm all for scaling the business as long as every single creative decision still has to pass across my desk for final approval,"
Right.
which mathematically guarantees a bottleneck. They are choosing their own ego over the mission's success. Okay, layer number 4 is nostalgia. And I want to zero in on this one because the text uses an analogy here that I think is utterly brilliant.
It goes back to the Israelites in the wilderness.
Yes. Okay, so remember, the Israelites are finally freed from centuries of brutal, dehumanizing slavery in Egypt. They are wandering in the wilderness, they're getting tired, the manna is boring, and the future is uncertain.
Yeah.
And what do? They start complaining and actually longing for the food they had back in Egypt. They are literally romanticizing the place of their enslavement. The text observes that nostalgia selectively remembers comfort and conveniently forgets the cost.
It turns memory into a deceptive measuring rod. Nostalgia becomes actively dangerous to an organization when we assume that faithfulness to our mission means exactly recreating a past season of success.
Right.
We turn the past into an idol. We say, remember how great things were in 2015? We just need to get back to 2015.
Yeah.
But God is living, not repetitive. The market is dynamic, not static.
We want the rich food of Egypt, completely forgetting that it came with the heavy chains of Egypt. That is so powerful, and we all do this. We romanticize the good old days of a company when it was just 10 people in a garage.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember the camaraderie. Remember how fast we moved. We selectively forget that we were all working 90-hour weeks, eating stale pizza, having panic attacks, and nearly going bankrupt every Thursday. We idolize the past to avoid the hard work of navigating the future.
And the final, fifth layer of resistance is theological confusion. In a strict church context, this means the congregation has forgotten that outward mission is not just an optional side program for the extra zealous members. It is the fundamental defining identity of what a church is supposed to be.
Right.
In a secular or corporate context, we call this mission drift. It is forgetting why the organization exists in the first place. You start optimizing for shareholder comfort rather than customer value.
So put yourself in the shoes of a leader. You're standing in front of your team. You know the organization has to make a painful pivot to stay true to its mission. But the team is digging their heels in. They are resisting. How on earth do you navigate that if the resistance could be any combination of fear, fatigue, control, nostalgia, or confusion?
This raises an important question about the temperament and emotional intelligence required for modern leadership. The text gives brilliant, empathetic pastoral advice here. Discern, don't just react.
Discern, don't react.
A leader must diagnose the root cause of the resistance before prescribing a response. You cannot treat exhaustion with a lecture on obedience.
Oh, let's highlight that. If someone is drowning, you don't yell at them to swim with more passion.
Precisely. If someone is resisting because they are fatigued and you aggressively demand that they be more passionate or get with the vision, you will break them.
You will.
You will lose them entirely. If they are nostalgic, you can't treat them with harshness. They are grieving the loss of a past era, and grief requires patience. However, if the resistance is rooted in control, someone protecting their fiefdom at the expense of the mission, that does need to be firmly confronted. Change must be shepherded, not forced.
It requires immense curiosity from the leader. You have to ask, is this person scared of losing their place? Are they tired? Are they controlling? Are they grieving? Or are they just confused about where we are going?
Right.
And your response has to be perfectly tailored to that specific diagnosis.
Because as the text wisely notes, resistance doesn't necessarily mean the mission is wrong, and it doesn't mean the people are bad. It often just means the organization is being stretched, asked to grow into its next act of obedience or its next phase of scale. And growth is rarely a painless process.
Okay, so we've spent a significant amount of time diagnosing the illness. We've looked at the skeleton of decision-making, the invisible soul of culture, the suffocating fog of ambiguity, and the deep psychological anatomy of resistance.
We've covered a lot.
But what makes this source text a true masterclass is that it doesn't just leave us floating in the muddy waters of theory. It provides highly actionable, almost surgical exercises to bridge the gap between having mission language and building mission capacity.
Yes. The final portion of the text moves us firmly from diagnosis to action. It outlines what it calls the stewardship of capacity.
And I love these exercises because they scale. They apply to a church leadership board, a Fortune 500 executive team, or just you, the listener, trying to organize your own chaotic life. Let's look at the first one, capturing open loops.
The primary goal here is to externalize mental clutter in order to expose hidden organizational overload. In psychology, there is something called the Zeigarnik effect.
Okay, tell us about that.
It states that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed tasks. These uncompleted tasks act as open loops that continuously drain cognitive resources.
Interesting.
The text instructs leaders to sit down and rigorously list every single unresolved task, half-baked idea, lingering concern, and unfulfilled commitment currently operating in their minds or in the organization's periphery.
Every single one.
Every single one. Don't try to organize the list initially. Just get it out of your head and onto a physical piece of paper.
This is straight out of the best modern productivity frameworks. Because as long as those tasks are just floating ethereally in your head, they are consuming the RAM of your brain.
Exactly.
They're the very source of that invisible tax we talked about an hour ago. But I have a question. If a leader does this, and they write down 150 open loops, Doesn't that just create a massive, terrifying to-do list that induces even more anxiety?
Well, it can initially feel overwhelming, yes.
Yeah.
But the anxiety of seeing the list is actually better than the low-grade, constant anxiety of carrying it invisibly.
Yeah.
By capturing them all, you objectively expose how much the system is actually carrying.
Right.
You pull the fog out of the air and put it on paper where it can be addressed, categorized, delegated, or intentionally abandoned.
It forces you to say no to things because you finally see the true volume of what you said yes to.
Yeah.
Okay, that leads right into the next exercise, which I think is the most vital diagnostic tool for any organization. The bottleneck test.
The text asks leadership teams to rigorously analyze their workflows and identify the one critical system failure that is slowing everything else down. This is fundamentally aligned with the theory of constraints in business management.
Right. Think about the recurring frustrations in your team. Is it that communication between departments is terrible? Is it a lack of follow-up with new clients or visitors? Is it an agonizingly slow, multi-tiered approval process for minor expenses?
You have to find it.
The exercise forces the team to debate and answer a single focusing question. If we had a magic wand and could remove only one structural barrier in the next 90 days, which one would unlock the most momentum?
The genius of this question is that it prevents organizational overwhelm. When a team realizes their system is broken, the panic instinct is to try and fix absolutely everything simultaneously. They launch 6 new task forces.
Which ironically just creates more chaos and more fatigue.
Exactly. Finding the primary bottleneck focuses all of that precious problem-solving energy on the single point of greatest friction.
And once you find that bottleneck, the text advises a specific action. Converting problems to projects. This sounds like a simple phrasing tweak, but it is actually a profound linguistic and cognitive shift.
It alters the entire agency of a team. The text says we have to stop treating complex organizational issues as if they are weather patterns that will just eventually resolve themselves.
Right, like you're just waiting for the rain to stop.
Yes. So instead of sitting in a staff meeting week after week and complaining our visitor follow-up process is really bad, which is just a passive statement of a problem,
Yeah.
you convert it into a concrete project.
You change the syntax. You move from the passive observation, visitor follow-up is bad, to the active commitment. We will build a new 7-day follow-up system. Sarah is the assigned owner, and the deadline for implementation is next Tuesday.
Exactly. A problem is a passive observation of failure. A project is an active, structured commitment to a solution. And notice how beautifully this incorporates the 4 questions we discussed earlier. By naming an owner and a timeline, it demands follow-through. It eradicates the fog in one sentence.
It takes all this lofty, highly spiritual, theoretical, organizational language and grounds it in actual, inescapable accountability.
And we must anchor this back to the core, foundational message of the text. The author isn't offering these productivity exercises just to turn a church or a community group into a cold, efficient corporate machine.
Oh.
This is about treating readiness as a profound form of spiritual obedience. It is an act of stewardship. The argument is that to passionately send people into a mission without preparing the structural support to sustain them is not an act of bold faith. It is an act of reckless presumption.
Wow. To send people without a structure is presumption, not faith. That is a heavy and necessary truth. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've taken through this diagnostic landscape.
We started by dismantling the illusion of passion. We realized that vision is not enough. It must be matched by structural capacity or the engine will just burn out.
Yeah.
We learned that order is not the enemy of the spirit or of genuine community, but rather order protects love.
We looked closely at the organizational fog and the 4 vital questions that clear it. Who decides, who owns, who evaluates, and who follows through?
And we explored the invisible curriculum of culture, using the country club versus the emergency room, to understand how fatigue and trauma can make an organization turn inward and build walls.
And we dissected the deep psychological anatomy of resistance, fear, fatigue, control, nostalgia, and confusion, and how wise leaders must shepherd their people through change with tailored discernment, not just react with aggressive pressure.
Finally, we looked at the practical stewardship of capacity through actionable projects like capturing loops and identifying bottlenecks.
It truly is a masterclass in organizational health, but there is one final provocative thought from the text that I want to leave you, the listener, with today.
It's a great thought.
We spent this entire time talking about systems, structures, and capacities, but the text makes a profound theological point near the very end that shifts the perspective from the organization to the individual. It says that God doesn't just call a church or a person to go, he calls them to become.
Become before you go. It is the enduring pattern of the wilderness.
So what does this all mean for you? I want you to think about your own life for a second. Think about that mission, that specific project, that career goal, or that community change you've been pushing toward with all your might.
Hmm.
Maybe you feel completely stalled right now. Maybe you feel like you've been working so hard, revving the engine, but the progress is delayed. There's friction everywhere. You are exhausted and you feel like you are failing.
Right.
But what if the delays, the friction, or the seemingly stalled progress in your own life's mission isn't a sign of your failure at all? What if it's a divine wilderness? What if it is an intentional invitation to stay in the preparation phase just a little longer so you can be formed into the kind of person whose internal architecture won't collapse under the weight of the very success you're asking for?
What if the diagnostic muddy waters you are trudging through right now are actually the rich soil where your capacity is being grown?
What if the engine is ready, but you are being forced to wait while a transmission is built that won't break when you finally hit the gas?
Yeah, that changes everything.
It really does. We would love to hear from you as you process this. What are the specific bottlenecks in your own organizations or even in your own life? What's that one hidden constraint slowing everything else down? Share them with us.
We'd love to read them.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It's been an incredible, challenging journey through a truly insightful text. Keep asking the hard questions, keep clearing the fog in your own life, and we will see you on the next one.